His face stayed blank, and his hand stayed beside his thigh. Not much surprise that it didn't sound familiar, she supposed. After all, he'd only had eyes for Crystal that weekend. He probably hadn't given Avery a second glance. Why would he? It doesn't ring a bell. Sorry. And still he stood in the middle of the doorway. No invitation to come in, no nothing. Gatekeeper, lord and master of his own domain. She lowered her hand again, feeling foolish. We met in Niagara Falls last year. Ah, she thought with satisfaction. A flicker of something passed over his face. Avery swallowed and added, At Pete and Elizabeth's wedding. His dark eyes settled on her, so intense it made her want to fidget. She clenched her fingers together and made herself remain still. You were there? He asked. If that was an attempt to make her feel insignificant, it succeeded. Was she so plain that she wasn't even the least bit noticeable? The slightest bit memorable? Granted, she'd never been as beautiful as her sister, and whenever they were together, Avery did tend to fade into the background next to Crystal's perfect figure and pretty face. But confirmation that he didn't remember at all? Ouch. I was in the wedding party, she explained, wishing she could just tell him her reason for showing up and get it over with. But she had to ease into it, especially since she hadn't really been afforded so much as a smile or welcome. This was going to be so much harder than she'd imagined, and she'd practiced the words in her head over and over on the flight from Toronto to Edmonton and from the drive from Edmonton to Cadence Creek. Now those words didn't seem to fit the situation at all. You were? Why did he keep questioning everything she said? Annoyance flickered and she struggled to tamp it down. She had to keep a lid on her temper. Calm and rational was the only way to get through this first meeting. I was one of Elizabeth's bridesmaids. You were Pete's best man. She tried to smile, hoping to soften him a touch. A slight breeze ruffled her blouse, offering a tiny bit of relief from the blazing heat. There weren't even any shade trees to offer respite from the sun, just green and brown fields surrounding the rather plain farmhouse, broken only by a large barn and a couple of sheds. Yes, I think I can remember that much, he said, a touch impatiently. Avery looked over her shoulder, glancing back at the car she'd rented at the airport. So far, Nell hadn't made a peep, but that wouldn't hold out forever. She was glad now that she'd chosen to leave Nell in the car, considering Shepard's convenient amnesia about the weekend in question. But time was ticking. The window was rolled all the way down, but it was too hot to leave the baby in the car for more than a few minutes. She turned back, deciding they were getting nowhere and she might as well step it up. You probably don't remember me because you were pretty interested in my sister, she stated plainly. Crystal. Something lit in his eyes. So he did remember. She wasn't surprised. It was hard to forget Crystal Spencer once you'd met her. Pain flickered at the thought. Avery's sister had been the brightest light in her life. Her death had been sudden and shocking, only a few days after giving birth to Nell. Avery had been plunged into darkness, losing her only real family. But the darkness only lasted for a short time. Nell had become the new light in her life, her saving grace. I remember your sister, he said, a touch of caution in his voice. But that doesn't explain why you're knocking on my door. What did you say your name was again? Avery, she repeated firmly. My name is Avery. Right. Look, if this is about Crystal, we had an understanding from the start. It was a weekend thing. No expectations. Avery noticed he ran his hand through his hair, though, like he wasn't quite as cool about everything as he'd first appeared. And Avery was quite aware that the terms of the weekend had been set from the start. Crystal had made that abundantly plain each time Avery tried to convince her to try to find Callum. Each time Crystal had flatly refused to budge. She'd been determined to raise Nell on her own. She didn't